the Talk Station is proud to present The War Files. The War Files, a selection of interviews honoring our warriors of the greatest generation, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam.
Your name and where are you from?
My name is Virgil Day. I'm from Cedar Island.
Were you born in Cedar Island?
They tell me I was born in sea level.
Okay. All right. Where were you at the outbreak of the war?
I was on Cedar Island. I remember it very, very well. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. Mm-hmm. An older gentleman had been listening to the radio, and I was just a young man at the time.
How old were you?
I was 16. When he said that, I said, well, I'll be in this war. So anyhow, we had, being on Cedar Island, we were close to the war. We, oftentimes, we heard the ships blowing up, and we could see the fires and the smoke out there in the ocean.
This is during the Battle of the Atlantic, before we were in the war.
We were in the war, yes.
So you do recall those days when you watched the ships explode and catch fire?
Yes.
What was the attitude and the feeling of the folks in Cedar Island and down East Carteret County about the war, since you were actually seeing it right at your front door?
Well, I think even the old folks would have taken up arms.
Really?
Really. It infuriated them. And we had people in the Merchant Marines. As a matter of fact, I had a cousin in the Merchant Marines that was, his ship was torpedoed twice. The last time was the final time for him.
So the war had already come home to Cedar Island before Pearl Harbor?
Yes, yes. And I remember there was a soldier station down that way. Mm-hmm. Well, they would come to Cedar Island several times a week. Because they had there was one place that they would go to, and we'd all gather, the young people would all gather. And this one time they brought a man with them. Supposedly couldn't talk English or any other language that they would put towards them. Because it was the, I don't remember the name of the division, but they were from Pennsylvania.
Wow.
That division was down here in Carteret County. And they had a lot of boys that could speak different languages, like Czechoslovakian and things like that. But he couldn't understand anything, supposedly. And what was he doing walking between Atlantic and Cedar Island, as deserted as that was?
Right.
And what was he doing?
Was it possible he was German?
Possible.
You don't know, though?
No.
All right, before we get back to before you're entering the war, what was it like on Cedar Island during the torpedoing of these vessels? You knew that the German U-boats were out there. What about the fishermen?
The fishermen, they never went outside. We always stayed inside.
In the Sound?
In the Sound, yes.
All right. You ended up entering the service. How did you get in, and when did you get in?
When I graduated from high school, I went to work at the shipyard in New Bern. They were building minesweepers for the British Navy, barber boat work, and I went there as a third-class carpenter. Sometime during the summer, I was walking down the street, and there was a truckload of Marines from Cherry Point that passed by, and one of them called me a draft dodger.
How old were you at this point?
Well, I just turned 18.
Okay.
And so that didn't sit well with me when they called me a draft dodger. So I think the very next day, I came down to Beaufort and I tried to enlist, but you couldn't enlist. I said, you can't enlist. I said, well, draft me then. So 2 weeks later, I got my notice.
How about that? All right, what year was this? The 1943? Okay. What branch of service did you end up going into?
Army Air Corps. I went to took me up to Fort Bragg, and during the interviews and all, and a lot of the boys says, well, I want to go in the Air Corps. you know, and I wanted to go in the Air Corps too. And I was the only one that got to go in the Air Corps. The only one. But anyhow, during the time of all the interviews that you had to go through, this one sergeant was interviewing me. He said, "Would you like to go into the Air Corps?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, go in and see the colonel in there." I went in to see the colonel. He asked me a few questions. I remember 2 questions expressly that he asked me.
What were those 2 questions?
Well, one of them was, "Do you bite your nails?" Well, I did at the time. I said, "No, sir." Never bit my nails since. Another one that he asked me, he said, "Does your legs kick at night?" I said, "No, sir." Well, they did sometimes, but, you know, I don't remember my legs kicking since.
Right, you were sleeping.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So those are the questions. Some of the
questions. 2 questions stand out, and of course they gave me the Rorschach test.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I don't. That's about all I remember. And he said, "Well, you're in the Air." He said, "You're in the Army Air Corps."
So where did you go from there?
Greensboro. Got basic training in Greensboro.
Oh, in Greensboro.
Yeah.
Then for how long you were at basic for how long?
8 weeks, something like that.
Okay.
But anyhow, I got accepted into the aviation cadet program, just like West Point. You went to college for when you came out, you had to go to another place in Tennessee for a month of interviews and training and seeing what you were really qualified for, whether it was pilot, co-pilot, navigator, or bombardier.
Where did you go to, do you remember where you went to cadet school? Where was that?
Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh.
How long were you there?
5 months.
Pretty rigorous?
Boy, they crammed it. I mean, they really crammed it to you.
Did you spend all your time in school?
Well, 5 days a week.
Intense.
Intense. And if you did not pass a subject during the week, you did not get a pass during the weekend.
Where would you go if you went on leave?
A lot of times I'd go to the skating rink.
Where?
I had never skated in my life. And
was this in the city?
A place called East Liberty. When we first got there, some of the boys were looking for things to do. Some of the boys said, "Well, let's go skating." I said, "I never skated in my life. Never had on a pair of skates." I went with them. So I strapped on a pair of skates. I got into the beginner's rink somehow. And but I had noticed this most beautiful thing I ever seen in my life out there skating, you know. And I had noticed her, but she hadn't seen me as I thought. Mm-hmm. But while this other girl was trying to show me how to skate, she came over and took over. This beautiful thing did. And I dated her all the time I was in Pittsburgh.
Now, you were there for how many months?
5.
5 months.
5 months. And there, long at last, we had to take training in Piper Cubs. We had to learn how to fly. Mm-hmm. And they said, "Well, you've got to learn the solo." But we didn't solo. The instructor sat in the back seat there. When I took my last flight, the only thing he said to me was, as I was on the last, I turned to the last leg to come in on the runway. Mm-hmm. He says, "You're slightly high." I got down and she bounced one time, and that was it. I got down one time.
How many flights did you make to get your wings?
Well, you didn't get wings, but I made 10 hours. 10 hours. Yeah. They said you got in 10 hours. And
had you ever flown before?
I'd never been in an airplane before. But as soon as it got off the ground, and the first time I said, "Well, this is for me." I had wanted to be a bombardier. At that very moment we left it off the ground, I wanted to be a pilot.
All right. You got out of cadet school. Where did you go?
Well, I went to radio school because the last day, when we got back to the campus, we saw everybody out on the campus. So we got out and we had learned that the government had cut out the program that very day.
Really?
Now, if you ever seen grown men cry, I mean, I'm not ashamed to say that I
really
was one of them too.
How many cadets were involved?
There was 2,000 there.
Wow.
We had four squadrons of 500 each.
Did you have any idea why they canceled the program?
They said they had too many already.
Pilots.
Too many,
All right. All right, so then you went to radio school.
Yeah, I was in Scott Air Force Base in Illinois. When I got through with radio school, I went to Yuma, Arizona for aerial gunner training, and I came in second.
Wow.
Overall.
What did you know? What did you do as an aerial gunner?
Well, aerial gunnery is shooting from 50 caliber machine guns from a B-17. A lot of it was ground training.
Understood.
I came in second on that. I mean, overall, they kept a record of how many hits you made, and if I remember correctly, the record was 118 out of 500, which is pretty good.
Right.
And I came in 120.
Wow. All right. Where did you end up after that? Where did you go from Yuma?
Okay, from Yuma we went to Tampa, Florida, where we got assigned crew, and we trained on B-17s. We honed up our skills on B-17s. We eventually ended up in Italy. I was promoted in corporal when I got out of gunnery training. Mm-hmm. When we got to Savannah, Georgia, I made sergeant. Then we went up to New Hampshire, and then we flew to Newfoundland. That was the 1st of April in '45, and that's the coldest place I ever seen in my life. I thought I was going to freeze to death. And in the meantime, the whole crew, which consisted of a crew of 10, mm-hmm. Went to Georgia. But in Georgia, they told us that only 5 would be going overseas, and that was the pilot, co-pilot, navigator, flight engineer, and radio operator. So anyhow, when we left Newfoundland, got ready to leave Newfoundland, it was 11 o'clock at night, and it was cold. Mm-hmm. And we had those sheepskin suits on, But the flight engineer and myself had to get out and chop the chocks out from the wheels that iced in.
Wow.
And the engine's running. I thought I was going to freeze to death. I chopped as hard as I could. But we went to the Azores Islands from there. From there we went to Marrakesh, French Morocco. Mm-hmm. From there we went to Tunisia, where we laid over a day or two, and we got to visit the Casbah.
How was that?
Oh, that was something else.
How were the American troops received in these countries that you were visiting?
Great.
We're at this point where the tide has turned. Am I correct?
Yes.
The war, we're beginning to really now recognize we're winning the war.
Right. And we were received great. And anyhow, then we went on up to Italy. We landed in Bari, and we ended up at Foggia airfield. They had a lot of airfields around Foggia, Italy. That was on the east coast of Italy.
Okay.
The land was flat. They called it the Plains of Foggia out there. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of airfields out there. By that time, I had made staff sergeant. And anyhow, I got in 3 missions before the war ended.
Okay. Tell us about those 3 missions.
I know we went up the Brenner Pass one time, went to Po Valley one time, and I'm not sure where the other one was. It may have been up at the Ploesti oil fields up in Hungary.
What was it like on those missions?
There wasn't any German Air Force at that time,
right?
So we didn't worry about that. of course, the P-51s escorted. I mean, they were around, you know, plenty of them. And but when we got on the bombing run, there was plenty of anti-aircraft fire. I mean, you looked like you could get out and walk on that stuff, you know. As far as I know, our plane the plane we were on 3 times, only got hit 1 time. I don't know if you know anything about a B-17 or not.
No, I was going to ask you about that.
The B-17, the radio compartment is right aft of the bomb bay. I mean, there's just a wall separating the two.
Okay.
Okay, on the bombing runs, the door had to be open between the radio room and the bomb bay compartment so that I could tell whether all the bombs had been released or not. Okay, I guess during the bombing run, sometime during the bombing run, I looked up, and there was a hole about that big up there. Just missed me. And the radio, the table in the radio room was not this wide.
Small little table.
I just had a radio there in a place where I could make notes and so forth. So it didn't miss me very much. And when we got back, we couldn't find any other hole. What happened? I mean, you know,
so
we figured that when those bomb bay doors were open, it had to have come up through the door out that way, or vice versa.
Okay. What was the attitude of your the crew on board the airplane and the other crews on these planes as they were heading out for a bombing run? Was there? Did you have any knowledge that the war was coming to a close?
Yes, we sort of figured they were. Well, our attitude was, let's go do it.
Granted, you only went on 3 bombing runs, but there were a lot of bombing runs. How long were you there before the war ended? How many days, weeks?
Well, we got there. I think we got there in March. I don't know how many days we were there before I got the first mission. I don't remember. It wasn't too long.
What was it like on your first mission? Were you at least a bit anticipatory, excited?
Yeah, I was a little apprehensive.
Okay.
You know, a little apprehensive.
How about by the...
I mean, I wasn't until I looked out the window. We had a window right alongside of me and saw that flak out there. You know, I mean, it was.
By the third time, was the apprehension pretty much gone away, or were you still?
Well, you were still a little bit apprehensive, but not as bad as the first time. Yeah.
How old were you at this point?
I was 19.
I've got to ask you in here a moment. 19-year-old, going off to war.
It was something I wanted to do. I mean, everybody wanted to do something. You know, I mean, I've even heard old men say that. Well, if they'd take me, I'd go. You know, back then. I mean, people were mad. I mean, you know, they were really patriotic.
All right, you were there for 3 bombing runs. The announcement came, victory in Europe, VE Day.
Well, we were the last troops to come to the squad to that group or squadron. So they put us guarding the planes, and because we knew, I guess they knew that they were going to put off some fireworks.
Okay.
You know, they get the flares and stuff out of the planes, you know.
All right.
So they put us there to keep the people from stealing flares and stuff.
What about the celebration? How long did it last?
All night. All night.
Then what happened after that? I mean, you've got the announcement, victory in Europe. What was the feeling?
I've been asked that before. It was a feeling of relief, a feeling of victory, but yet I don't exactly know how to explain it. We just wanted to keep on fighting.
Understood. You had just gotten there. All right. What happened after that?
They took all the guns off of the B-17s, and they converted them to ferrying troops, and they transferred us over to Naples. And so we started ferrying troops from there down to Port Lyote in Africa, which is near Casablanca. And we were in the air all the time. We'd take troops down one day, come back the next day we'd be in the air again, taking them down there.
What was the attitude of those that you were ferrying out of Italy? Were they relieved, and were they excited about coming home?
Oh, they were excited about coming home, yeah. Yeah, that was one of the first legs home. Yeah.
Did you have any chance to visit Naples or any of Italy while all this was happening?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I went into Naples, yeah.
What about the war in the Pacific theater? What was the conversation? Was there anticipation of being diverted to the Pacific?
Well, at first we probably thought so, but then it wasn't too long before Japan surrendered. Of course, now we were over in Naples then.
Right.
When Japan surrendered, and we had a good celebration then.
Okay.
So,
now, how long were you in Europe?
About 6 months.
And most of that time ferrying troops. Then where did you end up? What happened?
Well, we ferried a plane back. The plane we ferried back was 3 numbers from the one we carried over.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They were brand new planes, and they had new equipment on them, and they had jamming, radio jamming equipment on them, and they were the first planes that had that.
You flew back to where in the States?
Our first leg of the journey was from our air base in Italy to West African coast. Then we flew on over to Natal, Brazil. From there, across the equator.
Wow.
Okay, then we flew from there on up to Georgetown, British Guiana. That's where the massacre occurred, you know.
Right.
And from there to Puerto Rico, Ponce, Puerto Rico, and from there to Fort Lauderdale. Before
we wrap up on the conclusion of the war, you were in the radio. You were the radio operator. Were you privy to information about the war that you couldn't share with others by any chance? Did you hear conversations?
Well, no. It may have been the last or the next to the last flight that we made from Italy to Africa. On the way back, we had left the engineer in Africa because he had gone someplace and didn't get back in time. And the navigator was standing behind the pilot, and he saw a little green spot down in the water, which meant that somebody had to ditch their plane.
Right.
So we went down to investigate, and we found 4 men on a raft down there. I got on the radio. I got on the air sea rescue. Nobody ever told me this in school or anything, but they didn't answer. And I found out later that they wasn't supposed to answer. But anyhow, I sent out a message to the air sea rescue, give them our position and all the details that I could see, you know. And then I got on the international distress frequency and sent that. And I go back and forth doing the same thing, you know.
Right.
The next day, well, I was worried about it because nobody answered me.
Right.
And you had to tune up those radios according to the frequency. And there was a lot of mathematics involved. And we didn't have computers in those days,
right.
So you had to do it by hand. And I said, well, I made a mistake somewhere. And anyhow, the next day, the communications officer called me in. I said, uh-oh. You want to see me, sir? He said, yes, sir. I said, yes, he said, I want to congratulate you on the good job you did yesterday. And so I sort of flabbergasted there. I said, I didn't think I did anything. I said, nobody answered me. He said, well, they weren't supposed to. And anyhow, we talked a little bit, and he says, I'm going to put you in for promotion to tech sergeant.
All right. You got back to the States as a tech sergeant. Then what did you do?
Well, they sent me to Greensboro. I wasn't quite eligible for discharge at that time. Some of them got discharged right away. Mm-hmm. It all depended on how long you had been in and how long you'd been overseas and all that
right.
stuff. They sent me to Greensboro, North Carolina, where I took basic training, and they had an Army Air Force overseas replacement depot there.
Okay.
Where they shipped troops out to go overseas, assembled them to go overseas. Mm-hmm. So we shipped out troops, and wasn't there too long, and the master sergeant retired. He just retired because he was old enough.
Right.
And I remember this just like it was yesterday. He said, Sergeant Day, I don't remember the name of the master sergeant, said, Master Sergeant so-and-so, who's retiring. He said, we need somebody to take his place. If you want to take his place, said, I'll put in the paperwork for you to be master sergeant. I said, Lieutenant, if you could make me a general, I wouldn't accept it. I wanted to get out. But I had a girlfriend, and I wanted to,
right.
I wanted to get married and all that stuff, Didn't have any sense.
All right, so when did you separate from the Army Air Corps?
Sometime in March, I think it was. March 13th.
Of March?
1946.
March 13th, 46. Okay. All right, a few questions for you. You've seen World War II, and you mentioned a moment ago that everybody wanted to participate. Everybody felt compelled to do that.
Yeah.
When you came home, what did you do with your uniforms and your awards and recognitions?
I left mine at my mother's. I stayed around home for a while, and then I got a chance to go up to Washington, D.C. to work with the FBI. So I got up there and a fingerprint specialist.
After Korea, we have a Korean memorial. After Vietnam, a Vietnam memorial.
Yeah.
But not until 2000 did we start building the World War II memorial.
How about that?
What did you think of when they started talking about the memorial?
I thought it was about high time.
Mr. Day, what was your takeaway from World War II? What did that teach you?
Well, it matured me a lot, I guess. I learned that life is a precious thing. Mm-hmm. And it can be taken away at any moment. I learned that to be an American is the greatest thing in the world.
And it was worth the potential of losing your life.
Right.
Mr. Day, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
You've been listening to The War Files, a selection of interviews honoring our warriors of the greatest generation, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. The War Files is a TalkStation presentation.